Good morning, everyone. Hello, hello. We're here with you this November morning to sing you some songs. Beverly and Chris, let's do it. We got a head start on Christmas at our house. An open hand, an open heart, just a softer place to land. Maybe a kind word you've been told before, but you never heard. It's from a stranger, someone you have never met before. Someone could be opening a door. Do you always take the beaten track, the same way there and the same way back? I wonder what you'd find. You took some time with a stranger, someone you have never met before. Someone could be opening a door. We look but we don't see, close our eyes so easily, and we miss the chance to say, is there something I could do for you? For you. And in the morning when you rise, do you say, I'm gonna try? When you lay your head to rest, can you say, I did my best? For a stranger, someone you have never met before. Someone could be opening a door. We look but we don't see, close our eyes so easily, and we miss the chance to say, is there something I could do for you? Something I could do for you. Something I could do to help you through. 'Cause helping you might just help me too. La 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 la. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Chris and I wrote that one.
And next Sunday, we are ultra excited to announce that our guest speaker will be the legendary spiritual recording artist and teacher, Karen Drucker. With 19 CDs recorded to date, you already know many of her songs, which include what many now consider to be Unity classics. Songs like I Am So Blessed, and There Is Only Love, and You Are the Face of God, to name but a few. Karen was awarded an honorary doctorate of music by the Centers for Spiritual Living. She also won the Grace Award from Unity Worldwide Ministries and was even given the Spiritual Beacon Award by Mile High Church, the largest New Thought church in North America. Jean Houston refers to Karen's, quote, magnificent art and presentations, and says Karen is the #1 spiritual performer in her book. She says the way Karen relates to the audience and her humor joined with compassion is mythic. From all reports, Karen will delight us with not just her music, but with unique and highly accessible spiritual teachings. That's next Sunday, right here at Unity of Vancouver. Invite your friends. They'll thank you for sure.
And now, to lead us in meditation, Reverend Cynthia Briggs. Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to see you. So let us just move into the breath and awareness. And I invite you to close your eyes or have a soft gaze away from your devices. And just taking in some breath, becoming aware of your heart center. Becoming aware even more fully of this community and the sacredness of this time together. And today, in the daily word, the Unity Daily Word is forgive. In the peace of prayer, I release all unforgivenness. If I hold on to feelings of hurt, betrayal, or anger in response to another person's words or actions, I block the flow of divine love and peace in my life. Likewise, holding on to guilt, shame, or embarrassment that may arise when I have hurt another person also keeps me from experiencing divine love and peace. Forgiveness removes all barriers, all obstacles, anything that may be disrupting my experience of the divine presence. So, forgiveness. The inward practice of affirmative prayer is so key and important to coming into a place of forgiveness. And forgiveness is simple, but it's not easy necessarily. So for our meditation this morning, I'd like to just invite us to think of someone or a situation in our life. Maybe it's current or maybe it's from the past. Maybe it's already healed. But think of that person or situation or that sentient being who you feel blocked from because there needs to be some actions, some healing process around forgiveness. And it's important because we only have a few minutes of this meditation. And so it's important as we go through it that this is someone that, or some being that you really feel like you're in the place of sitting with for the next few minutes, sitting with the possibility even of coming into a place of forgiveness. And it may be someone that has hurt you, that you wish you could come and you'd like to come into a place of forgiveness with them, an apology from them, or it may be someone you have hurt and it's difficult to come and apologize or know how to bridge that gap. One important thing in forgiveness is to know that there are no shoulds or oughts. I should do this or I ought to do that. Forgiveness is a process of coming deeper into your heart. And as the affirmation prayer was saying, to really allow divine love to flow through you and know that heaven is guiding us. God will guide us if we open our hearts to come into a place of healing, a place of allowing that energy of forgiveness to move through us. So as you imagine this person or this situation, it might even be an animal, or it might be the earth itself. It may be a whole collection of people historically who maybe our particular group or your particular group of people have done harm to, even though you may not have done harm directly. So whatever place you're coming into to work with this idea, this practice of forgiveness, just imagine for a moment in your heart, gently, tenderly, of sitting with this person or these people or these beings, or sitting with the earth herself. And breathing together. No words, just breath. Knowing we all breathe the same air. Our hearts all beat together in the ebb and flow of the energy of life, of this manifest realm. So just breathe and imagine in your mind's eye what that must feel like and what that looks like. This person or beings may have already passed from this physical body, and there can be healing on the invisible level there to just be in the spirit together. Or they may still be in their physical body, but maybe you don't have access to them. And so meeting them on that higher level of consciousness, that higher invisible level, is a beautiful way to come into a place of healing, a place of forgiveness. Both in asking for forgiveness or providing, receiving their forgiveness. Just take a moment to imagine what it might sound like or feel like to say what the hurt is. What words might be spoken. Using I statements and using statements or words of compassion, words to heal, not to hurt any longer. And if you have been hurt by this person or these beings, then to know that they hurt too. Hurt people hurt people. That's how it's passed down. So making a space in your heart, in your life, to actually allow the hurt to be spoken, not to dwell there, but to know this is the process of forgiveness in giving and receiving. And that may be as far as you can go with this, is just to breathe together. Maybe the words aren't able to come yet, and that's okay. It's a step. Or maybe you do have words, and that's another step. Just breathe with it. Giving compassion to yourself. There's sometimes we need to forgive ourselves before we even forgive the other or ask for forgiveness. So making space for that too. Being tender with yourself and compassionate with yourself for all that is in this practice of forgiveness. There's no blame or shame. It's just a place for the love energy to flow through. When we make space to forgive or to be forgiven, then it is liberating and freeing. It opens new areas of our life that we don't hold this grudge, or we don't hold a place in ourselves that we're walking around with day in and day out, just feeling how it brings us down, but it actually lightens our heart. It lightens our step. We can move more freely and do the work of spiritual practice for which we are here. Sometimes the person that we're with, or that there is a place of healing that's wanted or desired, maybe they're not in the place to meet with you. So doing this practice on the invisible realm, where you make it a part of your daily life, or even weekly, or however it fits into your life, in a ritualistic way, in a ceremonial way, to close your eyes and just sit and imagine breathing together, coming into a healing bubble, if you will. Because soul to soul, we can meet each other in the place of forgiveness, even if we can't necessarily do that in the physical presence of one another. So those conversations that we can have on a spiritual level in the invisible realm are really, really important for freeing up the energy of divine love and allowing God to work through us and through all our relationships. So just breathing together, breathing in this place of forgiveness, feeling the energy flowing through our bodies, through our hearts, and knowing that the practice of forgiveness is simple, but not easy. And it takes time. Sometimes it takes time. It's a process. And to go gently. Practicing inwardly and outwardly. Breathing in and out together. Knowing that heaven can meet you in the place that you are. God will meet you as you open your hearts, as we open our hearts, as I open my heart in the place of divine love. May it be so. Peace be with you.
To share his ideas with us on re-enchanting heaven and earth, Dr. Will Keepan.
Thank you, Randy. It's a great privilege to be here today with all of you, as always. And today I'm going to share with you a vision of the universe that's very dear to my heart. And I spoke somewhat about it in our last session. And I really believe that my whole life has been a kind of quest for truth. And this is something that is very dear to my heart. And I think is an articulation, as I said last week, of the one presence and one power active as the universe and as my life and your life. So, and it really comes down to the reality of this understanding that there is this oneness. Everything is connected to everything else, not just in a physical sense, but in a consciousness sense. And so what are these connections and how does this all play out? Now, as you all know, I am trained as a physicist. I spent decades of my life delving into understanding the universe from the physics perspective. And it's very rich and profoundly insightful. And it also left me hungering for the deeper mysteries of the soul, which physics doesn't really speak to. And so, as I said last time, as the Dalai Lama outlines the plans, we first, for sort of coming into the deepest understanding of existence, first we study the physical universe. Then we have to study the invisibles of life. And then the whole question is, how are these things connected? And from quantum physics, we have this idea that all the particles in the universe are fundamentally interconnected. And from David Bohm's ideas that they're all connected in this kind of fractal hologram, which David Bohm called the holo movement. Now, I want to invite you this morning into an imaginative journey, into a visionary journey. And I want to invite you to open to possibilities, because what I'm going to be sharing is very controversial. And it's definitely anathema to the orthodox scientific worldview in which we have all been trained. And yet, I believe this will be basically part of the next revolution in science that will reawaken our consciousness to our participation in this planetary cosmic home where we find ourselves living. And that's why I entitled this The Re-Enchantment of Heaven and Earth. Because what's happened for me through this whole awakening that I'm going to share with you today is a re-understanding of the nature of the cosmos, and that it literally lives and breathes like we do. That this idea of as above, so below is a living reality in some sense. As Plato said, the entire universe is one being, and it is alive. And what that means is that space is not some giant vacuum, empty and lifeless, devoid of matter, some kind of cold, aloof vacuum in which there's nothing. That space itself, as even Einstein's relativity theory says, is a creation. It comes out and is co-created with matter. And it is a living kind of container, a temenos, a sacred contemenos, full of different kinds of consciousness. It's like a sacred stage. And then the celestial beings, the planets and the stars, that these in some sense are alive. The planets, for example, are not just balls of gas and rock, as the scientific worldview has depicted them. They're not inaccurate. They do have those properties, but they are much more than that. We have objectified them into mere physical objects, when in fact they are the planets that we see in the sky with our telescopes, are the tip of consciousness icebergs. And all we see through the telescope, all it can see is the physical aspect of the planets. And this is the central blind spot of the Western tradition, is to take the exteriority of things to be the entirety of things. Let us not make that mistake. We know that all beings have interiority. And so we must kind of embrace the interiority to come into the full truth of reality. And in my understanding, the planets are these vast waves of consciousness, of living being in some way, as are the stars. And so the whole universe is permeated with meaning and depth. Time itself is pregnant with meaning. Time is not just some linear ordering index of events, one after the other, in seconds, days, weeks, and months. Again, it is that, but it's much more than that. Time itself, each moment, is the cosmos birthing itself anew. It is the word being spoken, and that word is with God and is God. And time is the sacred vehicle for that word to be spoken afresh in each moment. So, as Thomas Berry said so beautifully, the universe is not a collection of objects, but a communion of subjects. And the current awakening that is happening now at the cutting edge of science is to begin to recognize this, and is to begin to graduate from a materialistic view of existence to a consciousness understanding of the nature of reality, in which matter is one part of this whole vast consciousness realm. So, to get into some of the details of this, what I want to say about the planets is that the planetary bodies that science knows, as I said, are the tip of an iceberg. The planets have a wave-particle duality, just like we learned from quantum physics. The actual physical planets are the particle part, but there's a wave part, and those waves are the consciousness, the archetypes, that somehow, in some way that's still vastly mysterious, live in the planets and are associated with the planets. They also live in the galaxies and the stars. These conscious levels of consciousness are manifest throughout the cosmos. But I want to just share with you some of these planetary archetypes and show a little bit about how these waves work. And they move in these vast cosmic rhythms. So for example, the outer planets, which are called the ambassadors to the galaxy, there's a way in which the further out they are, the more they correlate with the inner depths of transformation and the hidden depths of our own being. So for example, the planets Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are called the ambassadors to the galaxy. And they all move at different rates. Uranus goes around the sun every 84 years, Neptune every 158 years, Pluto every 248 years. And of course, as you know, we're now discovering other planetoid objects. But the Neptune-Pluto cycle, for example, they come into the same part of the sky every 500 years. And the last time they did that was from 1880 to 1905. And that particular combination, because Neptune is understood as representing visions, mysticism, the oneness, the mystical oneness of all things, ideals, universal love. So Neptune relates to, it dissolves boundaries and it relates to this vast mystical oneness of consciousness. And even the name Neptune, which refers to the ocean and the archetype of trident, is striking because Neptune has this watery sense in astrology. And recent scientific, some of those Voyager explorations discern that Neptune may be largely water, like much of it on the interior of Neptune may be liquid water because of a radioactive heat element at its core. But be that as it may. So basically the planetary awakenings here on Earth that are associated with Uranus, with the Neptune-Pluto conjunction in the late 1800s. Just a few other kind of things that happened at that time. There was a kind of profound and historical metamorphosis in the modern psyche, including, as you know, the birth really of the New Thought movement and the Theosophical movement and the whole work of the Fillmores. The birth of the Unity movement happened during this time. It was also a time when we had the first Parliament of World Religions, the first time in human history when all of the major religions came together in North America, the New World, in Chicago in 1893. And Charles and Myrtle were there sitting in the audience. It was at this time that the yoga traditions and really the Eastern traditions came and made a major impact in the West. And we had Theosophy, we had Vivekananda, who came, he was at the Parliament of World Religions. He then basically established yoga for the next 10 years across the West. So we had these major demographic and social shifts at the time. We also had Freud's discovery of the unconscious and the whole birthing of the psychology of the unconscious and essentially the spiritual dimensions of human consciousness being more recognized in the Western tradition. We also had the emergence of quantum physics and relativity theory during this period, which overturned classical physics, toppled it completely, and revolutionized all of science. And we had corresponding transformations in the arts. So I'm just giving you a very brief view, but this was a very radical period of a lot of profound consciousness awakening that began within a fairly short period, 10 to 15 years, very concentrated period. The next time that we had one of these major planetary conjunctions was Uranus and Pluto. And they come into conjunction about every 139 years. That's why I say these are sort of big movements. So you can think of these as kind of gigantic waves of consciousness and presence and being. And when they come together, they merge, they mix, they mutually reinforce one another. And there's a kind of empowerment, a little bit like the sun and the moon. When the sun is opposed to the moon. They come into a kind of relationship that we call a full moon, and the full radiance of the sun illuminates the moon, and it's just gorgeous. And we see it in a way that we don't normally see it. And when that moon arises on the horizon, there's something soul stirring there that we all recognize. Now, at one level, it's just beautiful, right? It's physically beautiful. But there's also a connection to cosmic rhythm, cosmic presence when that moon starts to rise above the horizon. And we know that the sun is showing its full resplendence, the moon in its full glory. In a similar way, when the Uranus and Neptune and Pluto, when these planetary bodies come into alignment in certain ways, they illuminate each other, they empower each other archetypally. So 1960 to 1972, Uranus and Pluto came into a conjunction. They only do this every 139 years. And many of you can remember that was a major period of rapid revolutionary and emancipatory impulses and accelerated social change and revolution, really in all spheres of activity. So for example, just as a reminder, we had the whole counterculture, the whole hippie movement, the student and anti-war movements. We had major awakening of the feminism movement, the sexual revolution, the student and anti-war movements. We had at that time the early gay liberation movement, which led to the LGBTQ movement of today. We had the whole awakening of the environmental movement, reconnecting with the earth, the concern for the earth. We also had, the civil rights movement and the Black Power movements. So we had these and the Chinese Cultural Revolution. We had these major, epical shifts that everyone recognized living at that time. What's going on? There's something very intense and powerful. We also had the computer revolution, which really began then, and the green revolution in agriculture. And we also had these, widespread sort of liberalizing religious impulses. The beginning of the awakenings of Vatican II happened, the opening of this whole sort of Orthodox religious structures. I mean, Thomas Keating was there in the Vatican, basically redoing monastic life that had been the same for 1,500 years. And they were beginning to take that apart and question it. We had the psychedelic revolution, and we had these creative revolutions in the arts. So virtually every aspect of human life was in some ways revolutionized. It wasn't always easy. I'm not saying there weren't major challenges. There were. We had the landing on the moon. So a kind of technological breakthrough where we broke beyond the terrestrial boundaries of the earth. So just showing you a certain sense of some of those correlations that are archetypally correlated with the archetypes associated with Uranus and Pluto. Uranus has to do with revolution, liberation, breakthrough, awakening, and in a sense, the divine design of the entire cosmos. And Pluto has to do with transformation and the death rebirth cycle and the intensity of the life force as it moves through time and space. And then moving forward from the mid 80s, about 1985 to 2001, we had the Uranus-Neptune conjunction. So here we have Uranus, which is that planet of liberation and revolution and freedom. But now it's, instead of connecting with Pluto as it did in the 60s, it's connecting with Neptune. Neptune is that planet I mentioned earlier of expanded mystical consciousness, of ideals, of visions, of essentially spiritual oneness. And so here in the 90s, we had more of a revolution by dissolution. We had the glasnost and perestroika in the Soviet Union, these non-violent revolutions, which brought down the Berlin Wall and the whole, Soviet bloc without a shot being fired, and the whole Cold War ended. We had the invention of the internet, this huge planet-wide transformation produced by the personal computer, and the rapidity of images and information just proliferating radically. So the Uranus is the images, and the electronic revolution, and Neptune universalizes and makes it present and awakens it everywhere. These are the kind of combinations of these planetary archetypes. We also had the awakening in the 90s and the expansion. In the 60s, we had the beginnings of transpersonal psychology, but in the 90s, we had a much deeper recognition of the esoteric sciences and the paranormal sciences and the science of near-death experience and mediumship and all of these fringe areas that are beginning to get more and more credible evidence in support of them. So there's a kind of awakening of the science of consciousness that began. And then with that coming with new images of the cosmos coming through the telescope and sort of that whole sense of new discovery there. So we have, in a sense, in the 90s as well, we had the biotechnology, the pharmacology revolution, genetic engineering revolutions. So there's a whole range of these things. And then into the collective imagination, we had like the Da Vinci Code, the Lord of the Rings, these kinds of epical dramas that kind of awaken the collective psyche to new possibilities. The whole series of interviews with Joseph Campbell and Bill Moyers on mythology, the awakening of mythology as a source of imaginative truth rather than just a mere irrelevant fiction, which is how it had been regarded in a more traditional sort of worldview. So we have these awakenings that took place at that time. Of course, also the expanded interest in spirituality and Eastern mysticism and the awakenings of all of the West, strengthening that awakening of religion in the West, Eastern religion coming to the West that had begun in the 1890s. And then 100 years later with this Uranus-Neptune conjunction being rapidly intensified. Now, we also had other things happening. When Saturn comes into the picture, Saturn brings in often some challenges. I won't go into details, but just to say that Saturn, when it came into opposition of Pluto from 2000 to 2004, and we had, the 9/11 attack, and then when it opposed Neptune in 2004 to 2008, and then 2007 to 2012 opposing Uranus, we had the financial crisis. So there's a lot of, not to blame everything on Saturn, but there's a lot of these factors that come in and get activated with these different planetary archetypes. Now you may be hearing all this and thinking, is he off his rocker? I mean, what is this that I'm saying? How could this possibly be? Let me just point out a couple of other of these archetypes, and then I want to sort of try to wrap this up into a way of seeing this as a credible cosmic paradigm. Because these correlations, some of these correlations are astronomical facts. So what, for example, and much of this is based, by the way, on the work of Richard Tarnas, if you're interested in all of this, but it has a very profound spiritual import because it is a living manifestation of the oneness of existence and how it plays out in the depths of details. And one correlation that I have found just riveting and so amazing is this correlation between the emergence of world religions since the great axial transformation. Now, the great axial transformation, or what Karen Armstrong calls the great transformation, took place from about the 580s to 530 BC, somewhere in that range. So you have, in a very short period, 50 to 75 years, as she has documented, and as Carl Jaspers has documented, he called it the Great Axial Transformation. And this was a time when there was an epical shift in the spiritual traditions of the world, in the religions of the world, in which there was a recognition independently on different continents of the awakening of the transcendent, and that human beings awakened to the presence of a transcendent power and force, which we call God. And it emerged in different ways, and several new religions emerged at that time. Zoroastrianism, Buddhism came about during this period, and there was this, what Karen Armstrong calls, and Carl Jaspers calls this kind of systemic awakening to the transcendent across the globe. It's a very remarkable transformation and inexplicable according to cultural historians. It's just what happened. Well, it turns out that that was the last time, astrologically, that the three outer planets, the ambassadors to the galaxy, all came into a triple alignment. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, all three came together during precisely those years from 580 to 530 BC. That is a very striking correlation, at least to note. But what's even more interesting is that since that time, every time there has been an emergence of a world religion, Uranus and Neptune have been in alignment. Uranus relates to that inventive revolution and liberation, freedom, and really to the mystical spark of divine mind. And Neptune relates to that oneness of all of existence that we speak about in the first unity principle. And when those two come into alignment, we often see awakening of a whole new kind of spiritual impulse. And they were in alignment at the emergence of Christianity, right around 0 AD for a period. So right at that period when Christianity was born, Uranus and Neptune were in alignment. They were again in alignment at the birth of Islam, 620 AD. And that cycle happens every 172 years. So I'm not saying that every time they happen, there's a new whole religion is born. But I am saying that each time a major religion was born, they have been in alignment since 550 BC. This has been quite accurately documented by Richard Tarnas and other scholars of archetypal cosmology and astrology. What I find so amazing about it is not only these larger planetary archetypes as they play out in the cosmos, but then all of this also happens in relation to each of our own personal lives. And so as one opens to this new worldview, one finds that these cosmic processes involving the celestial bodies are correlated with the patterns of awakening and transformation in our own personal lives. And I have seen this consistently in my own life and in the lives of people's astrological charts that I have studied and given readings over several decades. Now, when I say this, let me make it very clear that I am not saying that there's no free will. This is really important to understand. These planetary archetypes do not limit you to a preordained destiny, not at all. They are more like the seasons, the winter comes and the winter opens certain possibilities and precludes others. And then later the summer comes. And they don't limit your free will. There are certain things you do during certain times of the seasons, but you're still free to be yourself. And in fact, they support certain kinds of new activities as they come into play. So this is much more how the archetypes operate. And I sometimes think of the planetary archetypes as the fingertips of the divine hand. And they sort of turn each individual in life in those hands of God. And when they come in to intervene, if you will, in our lives through a particular combination of planetary transits, we call them, where they're activating certain points in our own psyche, which is based on their transiting certain points in our horoscope or natal chart. The way that I understand this is that the fingers of God are reaching down into our lives and supporting and twisting and turning and uplifting. And when we come into an understanding of that, we can see these patterns over the decades of our lives, supporting us, growing us, evolving us. So there are many examples of this, and because of the limited time, I want to just speak a little bit instead of going more in that direction, I want to share with you a little bit about the contradiction between this and our scientific worldview. Because if you look in Wikipedia, for example, under astrology, it will tell you very matter of factly that astrology is a pseudoscience and there's no scientific evidence for it. That's what it says at the opening article. And what then you find if you delve deeper is that there's a whole project on Wikipedia to try to correct the misrepresentation in the mainstream article. There's a whole objection to the mainstream article, and there's a whole debate about on Wikipedia, which I didn't really know any of this. I did this actually in preparing for this talk. I thought, well, some of the people are going to go after this talk and they're going to go on Wikipedia and this is what they're going to see. I mean, I knew this was the case in the culture, but I thought Wikipedia might be a little more advanced. But it's coming along. There's a major debate there about Wikipedia and so-called pseudoscience and how it should represent the scientific worldview. And there's a policy there that we represent the mainstream scientific consensus. And that's why they're describing astrology as a pseudoscience, because that is the mainstream scientific consensus. But you should understand, in my view, for example, it says there's no evidence, but it's just simply false. It's completely false. There are 61 peer-reviewed scientific studies which support astrology, some of them with very compelling probabilities of chance, very small, that this is just a chance occurrence. These 61 studies stand unexplained, unrefuted by science. Now there's, of course, hundreds of other studies that find no astrological effect, but that isn't really the point. The point is that the burden of disproof is upon science to show what's wrong with these 61 studies that don't conform to the scientific worldview. That has yet to be done. And the situation is getting worse because those studies are becoming ever more accurate and more precise. And so there is, in my view, a mounting towards a very significant scientific revolution here. It'll take place in the next few decades to centuries, depending on the level of resistance. But I think it'll just be decades because the computing power now is making it possible to do very precise correlational research with planetary positions and human affairs, such that, and mapping between, for example, the personality profiles as articulated in astrological charts and biographies of, let's say, famous people. So there's a recent study, for example, of 41 charts of celebrities and their biographies that are taken from public accounts and just word matchings with very advanced, complex computer correlations, and showing that the astrological charts can be blindly matched by the computer to a degree that has a probability by chance of less than 4 in 10,000. So these kinds of studies are out there now, waiting for scientific refutation and disproof in order to make the claim that Wikipedia so baldly makes, that there is no scientific evidence for this. It's simply false. But there is a whole debate on Wikipedia about this and people coming up, and there's a whole cry of outrage about all the studies that have been ignored. And this isn't just true in astrology, it's true across the board. There is still a very strong resistance in kind of the orthodox scientific community to many of these new kinds of awakenings in consciousness. So I just want you to be aware of that this is really a major revolution that is in process and is, in my view, is very significantly resisted by our current scientific worldview. And yet, what I think is going to come from this is a whole awakening to the participation. We are not just a speck in this cosmos. We have the entire cosmos living in us. That the planets, not the physical planets, obviously they're way out there in the sky, they're much too big. Jupiter is 1,700 times the size of the Earth. How could Jupiter be inside of me? But the consciousness of which the planet Jupiter is but the physical body of, that consciousness is in me, is in you. And these planets are living beings, and the galaxies and the stars are living beings, and they are in us, and we in them. And so we are a fractal microcosmic instantiation of the entire cosmos. And when we awaken to this reality, then as Rumi says so beautifully, the secret turning in your heart is the entire universe turning. And so this idea that we are the all, and the all is us and is contained in each one of us, is a living reality at the level of consciousness, not at the physical level, but at our level of life essence. So the bottom line here, if you identify with your form as a physical body, as a particle, so to speak, the wave particle duality, the human being has a wave particle duality. Your particle nature is your body. Your wave nature is your inner experience and your spiritual nature. If you identify with your form, then you are a mere speck in the cosmos. But if you identify with your essence, then you are the entire cosmos itself. And the galaxies are contained within you at a level of consciousness. And as we open to this level of communion, of the inmost depths of human consciousness with the transcendent depths of cosmic consciousness, we will have a whole new science and really a whole new marriage of the union of science and religion. So let us bring this to closure by just inviting you to close your eyes for a moment. Just take a couple of deep breaths. And just reflecting on this beautiful line from Rumi, the secret turning in your heart, the secret presence in your heart, the movement, the in and outflow of your breath. These are cosmic rhythms replicated in you. In the same way that every cell in your body beats with the pulse of your heart and has its life only because it's connected to that pulse. Every cell has the same pulse going through it that is going in your heart. In the same way, your soul is a living cell in the body of the entire cosmos. And those same rhythms that are pulsing throughout the cosmos are pulsing in you and giving you life. And in that way, you are not separate. You are intimately connected. And God would be incomplete without your contribution to this one living, magical mystery of life. Amen.